Buongiorno, benvenuti a tutti. Il mio nome è Giancarlo Piccirillo, faccio parte dell'Advisory Board di BTO. Non appena abbiamo deciso di affrontare in questa BTO il tema Food and Wine, ho subito chiamato Nick Di Fino, il quale mi fa: bene, parliamo di psychotaste. Io faccio: cos'è psychotaste? Parliamo di tutto ciò che riguarda il gusto, tranne che del gusto. E di lì l'idea di invitare uno scienziato, uno psicologo sperimentale dell'Università di Oxford, il professor Charles Spence, un ricercatore di fama mondiale che lavora in giro per il mondo e fa ricerca sul design multisensoriale. Ad introdurre Charles, appunto Nick Di Fino, che oltre ad essere un amico è un food performer, conduttore televisivo, collabora con Repubblica e Gambero Rosso. Nick, a te il palco.
Grazie. Grazie mille. Allora, qual è la differenza dell'impiattamento se io impiatto un dolce in un piatto nero o in un piatto bianco? Che cosa succede? Che cosa succede poi se io mangio del pesce in riva al mare oppure in città? Che cosa succede quando bevo un whisky in un bicchiere di cristallo o in un bicchiere di vetro? E che cosa succede quando io vado a cena con degli amici in un posto gradevole? Cosa succede tutte le volte che io mangio e qual è l'atmosfera intorno a me? Le risposte a queste domande si trovano in questo libro che si chiama Gastrophysics e a presentarlo qui oggi c'è il professor Charles Spence.
Okay, so it's a pleasure to be with you and to tell you a little bit about the world of gastrophysics and maybe how it applies to your world. As was mentioned, I'm a psychologist, not a chef, but work with chefs, food, beverage companies, wine companies, trying to design enhanced food and drink experiences. Take our inspiration from the top end of molecular and modernist cuisine, and then thinking about how to apply it to the mainstream, to hospital food, to airline food, to cruise ship food, or to holiday food. And I think there's a similar story in all those cases, that the environment, that everything else, apart from what you're tasting, has a much bigger impact on us than any of us realize. And that's kind of the theme behind The Perfect Meal from 2014 and Gastrophysics published in 2017. The new science of eating and how chefs, designers, creatives, and food and beverage brands are starting to take these insights around the senses to enhance the design of food and drink experiences, both in the moment, but in the memory of that moment. When people are perhaps back at home after their holiday, what do they remember of the meals and the drinks that they had? And how can one create more sticky memories that will then lead to repeat visit or purchase? Okay, how do we get this? And maybe where you think that sort of search for the perfect meal, the title of the book from 2014, is something we can't really access. We can't really study it. But I think we've all had it. We've all had our own perfect meal experience, and that's sort of captured here by this great quote from MFK Fisher, that once at least in the life of every human, whether he be brute or trembling daffodil, comes a moment of complete gastronomic satisfaction. It is, I am sure, as much a matter of spirit as of body. Everything is right, nothing jars. There's a kind of harmony with every sensation and emotion melted into one chord of well-being. We can all point to our own favorite meal. Maybe we are gastro tourists going to a Michelin-starred restaurant at the far ends of the earth. Or maybe it's a picnic in a summer meadow with one's family. Maybe for me it's fish and chips by the seaside. We all have our own perfect meal. And for me, as a psychologist interested in the senses, I want to study those great meal experiences and find what's common to them so that we can pass the insights back to the designers, the chefs, and the creatives of food experience in ways that they can action in order to enhance more of our meal experiences in the moment and in the memory in the years ahead. And as I said, I'm not a chef or a mixologist or a wine expert, but for me, the perfect meal might be something like the fish and chips at the seaside, a dish that we think of as, at least in England, as traditionally British. And there's kind of a feeling we all have that fish and chips just tastes better by the seaside, out of paper, eaten with your hands, than it does if served in some fancy restaurant off a white plate with silver cutlery. It just feels different. The food may be the same, but the atmosphere, the experience is different. And what makes that seaside fish and chips so nice? And how can I capture some element of it in order to enhance the experience away from the seaside in a restaurant that might be serving a similar kind of dish, say? Well, I think it's all about atmosphere, it's all about mood, and it's all about emotion. And for my own case, I can pick this as the family holiday, the last family holiday with my parents in Colombia, after a month going through all manner of fancy restaurants, all manner of experimental fusion world cuisine. But when I asked the family where had been their best meal experience on this trip, as on the previous one, it was from here in Cartagena de las Indias, on the Caribbean coast, eating camarones, kind of prawn cocktail, if you will, out of styrofoam with our hands in the middle of a roundabout with plastic chairs. How can that have been the best meal experience? But it was for each and every one of us. And I think there, by the coast, maybe we are more relaxed. And if we are more relaxed, then food tastes better. If we're in a bad mood, if we're fighting with our family, if we're stressed because of the travel, then food does not taste as good to us. And maybe it's also about the atmosphere, the mood, the temperature, the sounds, and the smells of the sea. I don't think I can literally taste those things, but I do believe, and I'm convinced, that they influence the tasting experience. And that sort of, for us, the Cartagena camarones, is a version really of what's come to be known as a Provençal rosé paradox. Because for all of us, it feels like we can just taste the food on the plate or the wine in the glass. I can feel it moving around in my mouth, and the flavor is there. And all that's happening in my mouth is what delivers that flavor experience. But really, everything else matters. And probably for the Northern Europeans who come for their summer holidays to the Mediterranean, they find that that Provençal rosé wine tastes wonderful. So nice that we're often tempted to buy holiday foods and bring it back to our own country to share with friends and family, along with some holiday snaps on a cold winter's evening. But that bottle of Provençal rosé does not taste the same. It does not travel. You cannot recreate the taste in the north of England that you had in the Mediterranean. So what changed? Did the bottle of wine get too cold in the hold of the aeroplane? No, I think what's changed is the mood and emotion that we're in. Because when we are on holiday, we tend to be, hopefully, more relaxed, in a better mood, perhaps with our family. And that sort of mood that we're in really does change the taste. So, if that's true, then how can we design differently with that knowledge in hand? And who you see here is Denis Martin, a 2 Michelin star Swiss chef from Vevey. He's got 2 Michelin stars, he'd like his 3rd. He's molecular modernist, but also locally sourced and seasonal, passionate about his food. But he realized in his restaurant that he got a lot of suits on account coming for dinner from Nestlé headquarters, located just along the lake. Suits buttoned up and stiff. And he saw that when they came into the restaurant looking like that, with a sour face, they just did not enjoy his food as much as he thought that they should. So what's the solution? It's this, something beautifully simple, incredibly cheap, but very, very effective. It is perhaps one of the world's first mental palate cleansers that's designed to improve the mood of the guests before the food arrives. You come for a single sitting, 30 covers or thereabouts. You sit down in the restaurant, people arrive early, some a little later. There is no cutlery, there's no glassware, there are no plates. There's only a cow sitting in the middle of each and every table. But what is that cow doing? Eventually, somebody will get curious. They'll pick the cow up to see whether it's a salt and pepper shaker Swiss style. Who knows what's going on? And when they pick it up and tilt it to look underneath, they'll hear the mooing of a cow. It's stupid. It's a €1 toy. But night after night, the chef has seen how as soon as the cows go in the air, people laugh in surprise. And within a moment, you have a whole restaurant of mooing cows, tables full of laughing diners. The mood has been elevated, and that is when the first dish comes out. Brilliant design, and if one looks at the world from the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America, to other chefs, you find they have variants of the mental palate cleanser, improving the mood because the pleasures of the table are really up here, not in the mouth. The other part of the solution here comes from trying to capture the atmosphere. And I see a lot of modernist experimental chefs these days trying to bring nature into the indoor environment of their restaurants. And here we see one of the first examples of this from Heston Blumenthal, former world top chef from his Fat Duck restaurant, 3 Michelin stars in Bray. It's a dish called The Sound of the Sea, and it looks like the seashore with sand, foam, seaweed, and some sashimi. The waiter brings in his other hand a conch shell, out of which dribble some earbuds, and he recommends that you put the earbuds in before you taste the dish. This has been the signature dish in one of the world's top restaurants for a decade now, and based on our research, showing that the sounds of the sea, the seagulls overhead, the waves crashing gently on the beach. This is what the diners in that world top restaurant here, and this makes the seafood taste significantly better, but no more salty than if you hear farmyard chickens, cutlery noises, or modern jazz. It shouldn't change the taste, but it really does. And this is one of the first examples of technology being brought to the dining table, that little MP3 player inside the shell, and a dish that's so powerful that it has moved some to tears, capturing the atmosphere of the seaside and bringing it to the interior of England, to a restaurant near Slough, as far from the sea as you can get, in order to enhance the taste. And here we're talking about a great chef who can do brilliant things with ingredients and on the plate. He's not using the technology to distract you from the food he's serving. He's using the technology to tell stories, to trigger nostalgia, mood, and emotions, using the technology to help him deliver the best thing at the moment, but also using it to create a sticky memory that stays with you for the days, weeks, months, and years after you have left that restaurant. Now, when we started working on The Sound of the Sea, as I said, I'm not the chef, we just work on the sound effects. We thought it was original, and it was the first time it had been done. And yet, if you go back, one finds that the Italian futurists were doing most of what the modernist and molecular chefs were doing a long, long time ago. Back in 1930s, Milan, F.T. Marinetti and his futurist colleagues were serving plates of frogs' legs to their dinner guests, whilst playing the sound of the croaking frogs. It's the sound of the sea 80 years earlier, but there's an important difference. I think Marinetti and his colleagues were not trying to make the food taste good. Anyone who's been to a futurist banquet will know to avoid the roast chicken filled with ball bearings. He was trying to provoke people into thinking differently about food and other matters, whereas today it's the top experienced designers who are taking the science of the senses, both on the plate and off, to deliver differentiated and memorable experiences. There it is. And anything you want to find in modernist cuisine, you'll find it predated, I think, in Marinetti's cookbook. Hence, the last chapter of Gastrophysics is all about the relationship and how much of what we see today really started out in Italy all those years ago. And the notion that we can use technology to tell stories around food, to take people, when they're in Shanghai, say, at Chef Paul Paret's 2 Michelin star Ultraviolet. Here we have a €900 tasting menu. We have people going around the world, gastro tourists, just to have a meal in this restaurant in Shanghai, flying hour upon hour to have the food served by the chef. And a chef who's French, who's passionate about his food, but it has the most technologically advanced restaurant, I think, perhaps in the world. And here he's serving the first course on the tasting menu, that fish and chips inspired stuffed caperberry. And once upon a time, this chef was not famous. He was unknown, working in England, and one day he went to a fish and chip shop to have those fish and chips, and it was wrapped in newspaper, and then he saw his own picture in the local newspaper. And it was the first time he thought, wow, maybe I am famous after all. So here, transposed to Shanghai, he's referencing that nostalgic moment for him. The dish comes to the table with the sounds of the sea, of course. It's followed by the sounds of the Beatles, quintessentially British pop group. You have the British flag projected onto the table and the British weather projected onto the wall, those oversized raindrops. All done to tell stories and to make sure that the diners are precisely ready for the dish when the chef thinks things should come out from the kitchen. So technology to help enhance the food experience and leading food, in this case, to become that gastronomic destination. And that's great, and I'd love to test at Paul Pare's restaurant, but at 900 euros a head, I know as a scientist I'd need 60 or 80 diners to demonstrate the effect. Too expensive to be able to do. And of course, diners in that expensive, curated meal experience don't want to be guinea pigs in an experiment. So we need to step back and then create new multisensory environments in order to assess just how much impact the lighting, the music, the ambient soundscapes, the textures, the feel, the temperature is having on the food and drink that is served. And this is where things like the Singleton Sensorium come in, where we took over a gunmaker's studio in London in 2013, had 500 members of the public coming through over 3 nights. They got a glass of whiskey, a scorecard, and a pencil. They started in the grassy room at the top with grass on the floor, green lights, deck chairs, croquet hoops, the sounds of the English summer in the background, and we asked them to say how grassy on the nose was the whiskey smelling, how sweet on the palate was it tasting, how textured the aftertaste when you swallow that whiskey, how much do you like the decorations, and how much do you like the whiskey right here at this moment. Then you take your whiskey and your scorecard down to the room you see in the middle here. Everything is round. Everything is pinkish, reddish, purple. Why? Because pinkish red are the colors of sweetness. Roundness is the shape of sweetness universally. Bitter, sour, or angular. And we have this tinkling sort of wind chimes coming from the ceiling. Why that soundscape? Because we've done the research to show that high-pitched sounds like this convey sweetness. Again, people take the whiskey. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What's the texture? How much do I like the room and the whiskey right now? Finally, people took their drink down to the woody room, wood on the walls, stressed wood on the floor, dead tree behind you, and the sound of everything woody we could think of. The double bass, creaking wood doors, burning log fire, a walk through the woods. And again, tell me about the smell, the taste, the texture of the drink. 500 people, 3 nights, and the results showed that that whiskey did not taste the same. It tasted significantly different. It was the same whiskey. It had not left your hand, and yet people could look at their scorecard, and here we've captured that Provençal rosé paradox in an experiential, multisensory tasting event, of which now in London and elsewhere you'll find many brands in this space trying to deliver differentiated, memorable experiences involving the senses and a product, but realizing they have to go beyond the glass, they have to go beyond the plate or the package to do so. So the atmosphere really does matter. And it can be these, nature sounds, the sounds of the summer or of the winter. If you've been flying on Thin Airways on their long-haul flights to Asia in the last year, you may have come across some of these atmospheric soundscapes of nature being played back as you eat the food on the aeroplane, designed to kind of capture the place where Chef Stephen Hugh picked the ingredients that you're eating. Atmospheric soundscapes going from the restaurant to the experiential event to the sky in this case. And beyond that, we can think about more obvious sounds, like the sounds that are associated with a place or a culture or a country. And that matters too, and again, much more than any of us ever think or will admit to. And I can show you many studies of this, how putting Italian flags on the table, wine bottles, red and white checkered tablecloths in a canteen in England will dramatically change the food choices that people make. If I play Italian music in a Las Vegas casino. I start playing a bit of Dean Martin. Those who are standing in the gantry in the food court can see the gamblers switching which food they want. If the queues are really long at the Mexican, play the Dean Martin over the tannoy, and suddenly everyone wants Italian food. Play another kind of music, and you can just shift people's behavior like that. You can shift their choices. You can shift their perception of the authenticity of the food simply by the atmospheric effects you bring to bear. We all deny it, but just look back to the 1990s and a study from an English supermarket where they had French and German wine. They played French accordion music one day, German umpa umpa, beer keller music the next. And they looked at wine sales. When they played French music, most people bought French wine. When they played German music, most people bought German wine, a complete reversal. And yet, when people came away from the counter in the shop and you asked them, did the music affect you? Why did you pick French wine today? Virtually no one admitted to the impact of the music on their choice. I was always going to buy French wine. It was beef bourguignon for dinner. But when you look at the sales data, you can see music affects us. It moves us in ways that we do not recognize and hence is very powerful. But of course, we might have to be a little bit careful here in sort of what sort of music and what sort of foods we associate with different gastro-tourism destinations. And maybe this spaghetti bolognese that was used in Bell's study in the 1990s is perhaps not quite the right one to choose, at least not according to the mayor of Bologna, who was all over the British press last week, saying he was sick of tourists, gastro-tourists, coming to Bologna asking for the spaghetti bolognese. It doesn't exist, he says. Maybe it's the wrong sort of pasta, but still, some sort of confusion here then between the kinds of foods that foreigners think are indicative or typical of a place and the foods that might actually be there. So what should we target here? What's really true, or what's true in the mind of the tourists thinking where to spend their tourism dollar or euro? And there are a lot of them, it should be said. This is an important question. In Britain alone, this from a couple of years ago, now 20% of British holidaymakers admitting, if admitting is the thing to do, that their choice of where to go on holiday is determined by the food on offer in that place. I think that's a change that we haven't seen previously, but if that's true, then what sort of foods can we offer? What sort of foods are most representative of our culture, cuisine, or country? And it's not just choosing foods, for, well, I'm on holiday, I'll choose the food I like. It's also people deliberately booking holidays solely for the food and going to some extraordinary lengths today, like the middle of nowhere in Sweden for a visit to Faviken, the restaurant. And the whole trip is designed around that one memorable and hopefully sticky and most likely multi-sensory meal. So this is a growing sector of the market, one that is exciting, but one needs to think carefully about what it is that one is offering and which segment of the food culture one's choosing to emphasize. But certainly I think with the rise in some of the Italia's top chefs worldwide, that is helping to put Italian food on the map in a different way perhaps than it has been previously, attracting a new kind of food tourist rather than those just going for the traditional and the authentic dish. There are, of course, questions. There are difficulties here, and maybe that's a question for you to think about what is the most prototypical example. If I had to boil down gastro-tourism for a foreigner, what are they coming for? What is that one dish, drink, or meal experience that is most representative? Or is there so much variety that you can't really do that? That might be problematic. And should we also be cautious of some of the press, at least abroad, around the exploitation of tourists in some of those over-visited destinations like Venice? Because if I'm choosing my holiday based on the food, and this is the sort of thing that comes to mind when I think about that destination and food, we might have a problem. But I should leave it there, I think. Enough to say, I think this idea of gastro-tourism, gastro-diplomacy, presenting a nation abroad in business, in politics, or to the general consuming public is one that is growing. And if you look back just over the last few years, you can start to see how many countries are forwarding and focusing on gastrotourism as a key part of their offering, trying to attract people in and trying to deliver, condense that kind of signature cuisine of, be it Malaysia, Peru, Korea, or Taiwan. And so I will leave it there, but hopefully I've given you a sense of why what we eat, what we remember about what we eat and what we drink is far more than just what's on the plate or in the glass. It's the total experience. The top chefs and creative designers realize that they're optimizing meal experiences and memory. But some of those insights about the total experience that you see in the 3 Michelin star, the San Pellegrino listed restaurants are now being incorporated into meal and drink experiences in the cellar door, in Italian wineries, on cruise ships, in airlines, and beyond. And I think that will work best if we realize just how much of the pleasures of the table are really up here in the mind and not where we think they are, just in the mouth. Thank you.
So, psychotaste is everything about the taste except the taste, which sounds quite avant-garde, at least here in Italy, because we are quite traditional. So how do senses make sense in this perspective? Yeah. Oh, we got the chairs. There you go.
So I think the important thing is to sort of realize that all our senses are important, and that very often our brain is picking up the sensory, the smells, the temperatures, the taste, the feel of a place, even if we're not aware of it, and incorporating it into this sort of multi-sensory perception. So it feels like I see things and I taste them and I hear things, but really up here, they're all mixed together. And so you need to know how they mix and which sense then dominates the experience in order to, I think, innovate in design, and not to believe people when they say, you know, when we asked people in our restaurant, did the music matter? Well, they all said no, it didn't influence them. If you look at the actual data, you can see there are factors at play that are very influential, and yet we don't have access to them as consumers or tourists or even as scientists.
Is this what we call synestheses?
Synesthesia?
Synesthesia.
It's linked to, but I think it's importantly different from. So if you go back to the futurists, Marinetti was having people eating without knife and fork, burrowing their face into the plate while wearing pajamas made of different materials, and he would encourage you to eat the food while touching your neighbor's textures, the sandpaper and the velvet. And he called that syntactilismo. And he had olfactismo, this kind of synesthetic smell, synesthetic touch. He knew sort of experientially that what you felt changed the taste of food. And what we bring to bear now is the science of the senses, saying why this happens and which are the best connections. If I'm trying to bring out the tannin in a red wine, what texture should I be feeling, say? So they thought of it as synesthesia, kind of this confusing of the senses that's popular in those who see colored. Whenever they hear a musical note, they see a color, or whenever they think of a number or a day of the week.
That was Kandinsky, wasn't it?
Kandinsky, for example, and many artists of a century ago. But these synesthetes are rare, and they are idiosyncratic, meaning that each synesthete sees different colors when they hear music, tastes different things when they look at something. Whereas these kind of matchings, like the sweet music and the round shapes and the red color that we put in our sweet room, those are shared amongst people. They're a bit like synesthesia, because you're connecting shape and color to taste. That's surprising, like synesthesia is, but it's consistent across people, which is unlike the idiosyncrasy of synesthesia. And because it's consistent across people, then you can use it in design and be kind of confident to some level that you will convey the meaning, change the taste or the experience in the way that you think it should taste, and not be reliant on random associations.
So that will work in every country at this point. And my question is, does the connection between science and food, does it work in Italy, in a place that it's very, very traditional?
So I think this sort of new approach to food is one that many young chefs and food and beverage brands are embracing. They see the potential and the importance of the approach, the new science of eating. But there are some traditionalists, even in the UK, and I start the last book with Sir Michael Keynes, a Michelin-starred chef, who says, I don't need any of this gastro-psycho-taste nonsense. I'm just an old-fashioned chef, and it's all about the local sourcing, seasonality, and that's it. Well done, well cooked. Nothing more than that. So I don't need what's in this book. And then you sort of ask him, well, How is it in your restaurant? Where is it exactly? It's in a country manor house with beautiful wood paneling looking out into nature. And are you serving your food off plastic plates or paper trays? Of course he isn't. Is the cutlery that you eat in his restaurant heavy silver? Of course it is. So I think you cannot ignore everything else. Whenever you eat or drink, you always do it somewhere, and there always is a sound or not, with paint or not, and scents or not, and certain expectations, and so you best be aware of them and try and optimize them for the kind of choices you want your guests to make or the memories you want them to walk away with.
Are we unaware that we actually approach atmospheric meals? Like you stated that atmosphere is more important than the product itself. So when we go to a restaurant, do we actually eat atmosphere rather than a meal?
So I think that has to be food there, and there has to be drink there. You can't turn a glass of water into wine simply by changing the lighting and playing the music just so.
That.
But what you can do is take a food or drink experience and draw people's attention to something in that experience. So if it seems different, bring out this note or that note, change the pace at which they eat or drink, or the choices that they make, that they feel, I felt that was my choice to order that dish or that bottle of wine, when in fact it can be so much else that is actually at work there. So while we can't literally taste the atmosphere or taste the plate on which the food is served, the glass in which it comes, the cutlery with which I hold, and the lighting is influencing the taste. And in some of our experiential events in London with wine brands, we take 3,000 people, give them a glass of red wine and a black tasting glass, get them to say how sweet, how fruity or fresh the wine tastes to them, and then simply change the lighting from red to green, and your taste will change 15-20%. And the winemaker sort of going, well, I didn't think this was going to work, and it's bizarre, but I can see the response of those 3,000 people, and then when they go back to Spain or even Italy now, and they're thinking about how to design the cellar door experience, when they're offering wine to the tourists and the wine tourists, then they're saying, is the damp, dark, smelly cellar really the place to make our wine sing? And what else can we do through the other senses to deliver that really sort of memorable and pleasurable?
You have a few examples as well on the weight of the cutlery, on the shape of the glass, how the glass is decorated. That all influences the way we approach the food that we're eating.
And in some ways, so we've done experiments in hotel restaurants, five-star hotel restaurants in Scotland, for example, serving people some Scottish trout. Half the diners in the restaurant have light canteen knife and fork. The other half of the diners in the restaurant on that day had heavy knife and fork. And then we ask people, how much do you like the food? How much would you be willing to pay for a dish like this in a restaurant like you're in today? And we find that those who hold heavy cutlery are willing to pay significantly more for exactly the same food. When we look in the world of coffee, we've just been working with baristas, coffee roasters and Q graders in Brazil and at the World Coffee Fairs with Fabiana Carvalho. And there we find the color of the coffee cup, just like the color of the plate, changes the taste of the coffee. The shape of the cup changes the taste of the coffee. The texture of the cup, in a sort of nod to Marinetti, really changes the experience. And you have those experts of the world of coffee thinking, we spent so much time thinking about the liquid in the cup or the glass, but we've never thought really seriously about the way that drink gets into the consumer's mouth. And when color and shape and texture matter this much, we want to optimize it. And that's why you'll start seeing now at the World Barista Championships, quite often the first thing that the competitors will do is ask the judges, which cup would you like? Or what kind of taste experience are you trying to have? And then they'll bring their knowledge to bear both in the beans and the roast, but also in the presentation of the cup as well.
So there's a lot of talk about how food influences the destinations today. And how can we leverage all the information that you're giving out today to make it a better destination? So how can we use food to make a destination?
So I think on the one hand, you see that having the celebrity world-famous chefs is one approach. You can't sort of whip one of those up from nowhere, but you see in England how people like Heston Blumenthal, and in Spain, Ferran Adriàs of this world, I guess Bottura. Here in Italy, how they have become destinations. They're restaurants. That everything else is sort of fitted around. We're going to have that one meal in that one place, sometimes by the seaside, as in Girona, at other times in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere, and yet, for the star chef, that is something worth going for, worth paying for, and we know that will create the memorable experience that we're looking for as part or as a highlight of our holiday trip. Beyond that, I think one sees, if you go 5 or 10 years after the rise of some of these star chefs, because England was not known for its food in the 1970s. It was never gastro-tourism never came to the UK. Why would you? But with the rise of Blumenthal, you see the next generation of young chefs coming to the fore, and now we have far more of the world-leading restaurants, and it becomes a destination. So it's that kind of the star chef leading the next generation, and as they immerse themselves, both in their own restaurants, but also I'm seeing increasingly a number of the hotels and hotel chains figuring out ways of making sure they have a destination restaurant in their hotel. It's not just food, we have to provide the food, but they're sort of realizing we have to compete with the Deliveroos and the Uber Eats and all of our hotel guests ordering the food from outside.
Right.
How do we make them want to come to the dining room? That's either by having the named chef delivering a multisensory experience that you cannot get on the back of a motorbike, or something like that, I think.
Does it come down to storytelling as well? It depends on how you present everything.
It does, indeed, and I think it's partly, as we've gone from the traditional 3-course meal, 5-course meal, we all knew where we were and where we were going to get to the end of the meal. Starts with this, then the main course and the dessert, and maybe the cheese and the salad, and it's all kind of orchestrated and organized. As you have the chefs now increasingly moving to tasting menus and going to 7, 9, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 even dishes at the end of the LBE, then the diners have lost. I don't know where I am anymore. How far have I come? Where am I going? And that's part of the reason why, say, in the Fat Duck, they make sure to have like a 3-course traditional meal set after about 16 courses of fun and play. Then you have the duck à l'orange, and you say, okay, that is the main course, that is the meat, I know where I am, desserts nearly there. So I think we need the storytelling to help diners deal with this vast array of dishes when they've lost the structure. And I see many of the chefs now saying, there's a sort of temptation to say, okay, I've got a tasting menu because maybe I can charge more, and I can show off all my great skills, and I'm going to give you a bang, 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 bang. Every course, a brilliant dish. And then you see diners who are subjected to that, and even though each dish was wonderful, after 5 or 6 courses, like, oh, enough, I can't cope with too much high-intensity stimulation. So what I think the chefs are realizing is they need to modulate the meal and the emotional journey. So how do I do that? And that's where they get drawn into the world of storytelling, of theatre, of movies, and why some of those most innovative chefs are speaking to, bringing in the theatre directors and the novelists and saying, what are the structures of stories? What are the emotional profiles? And maybe there are only 7, in fact, that most movies can be decomposed into, and which of those emotional trajectories are we going to deliver through our tasting menu in the restaurant, both to help the diner at the time, but crucially, I think, and there's a whole chapter in the book on the memory of the meal. Because I think there's kind of a mistake that we think we'll make meals perfect at the moment you're eating them. That's the aim. But I think it's not, because the meal lasts only an hour or 2. It's the memory of the meal, and it's the anticipation of the meal before you go, when you book your holiday, and you know you're going to that fancy restaurant in 3 months' time. That's where most of the pleasure resides. And if you had a meal that was wonderful, but you couldn't remember it at all, was it worth having?
That wasn't wonderful.
So you think what you really want to do is this sort of business school notion of stiction. I want to create sticky memories around food. How do I do that? Through storytelling, because now I've been to the Fat Duck. I forget what I ate, but I remember the story. You start in the evening, you go to sleep, you wake up in the morning, and the meal ends on course 20 at night time again. Okay, that was a story. Now what dish fitted in where? And probably it's also partly why the tasting menu the rise of the tasting menu, I think, is also partly can be explained by the fact that when you eat food, you remember the sort of first bite, maybe the last bite, and the highlight bite of the dish. The rest is kind of lost. You first taste it, what's it like? Is it amazing? Yes, it is. And then you switch off to court with your friends, send some pictures or do something else. Your mind is not on the meal. So that's kind of a wasted design opportunity. Why give people 100 mouthfuls of a big plate of food if all they're going to remember tomorrow is the first bite, the last bite, and the highlight? Have lots of mini morsels, tasting plates, single things, and then each dish, each taste has a potential hook for memory that will stay with people long after and encourage them to recommend the place, revisit, and sort of advocate for what is on offer.
I like when you mix psychology, food, art, theater all together. But I want to push you towards the future. What happens when we put together augmented reality, virtual reality, and food? What's the perspective? What could be the restaurant of the future when we put together technology, high technology?
So I think most predictions about the future of anything are wrong. They're kind of concerns about today, about tomorrow.
That's quite true. That's quite interesting.
But that said, so you should never believe any futurologist of food or anything else, I think. But that caveat aside, I think we can see already a growing interest in technology at table. And you see various uses from Paul Paret's, I think, sort of wonderful multisensory storytelling at one high extreme through places like Inamo Chain in London, where you can sort of see the food projected onto the table rather than just picking the name of the dish.
In Japan, with a visor.
And through the Petit Chef, where a little character comes onto your plate. And last time I was in Taipei, in the hotel where the restaurant was, it was booked up for months and months in advance. So these are different ways in which technology might be brought to bear. I see other chefs in Switzerland now taking tablet computers and saying that tablet computer, could that be a plate of the future? And if it is the plate of the future, because I can stick it in the dishwasher, what can I do? Yeah, actual tablet.
All right.
Well, I can then project the sight of the sea, and I can give you almost the Paul Paret ultraviolet experience on the tablet at home. That's great. Or I see many brands going to sensory apps. So we worked with everyone from Stella Artois to Krug Champagne to Häagen-Dazs ice cream have done it as well, trying to deliver the multisensory technological experience that you see in the restaurant in the home, but doing so by sensory apps where you download the app, scan the label of your Krug Champagne, and then you get, say, musical recommendations designed to enhance the taste of the drink or to make you think differently about the process of blending and creation. Sonic seasoning, in fact. So that is happening, that is coming. I think, in a way, the Swiss chef I mentioned, who is already in his Michelin-starred restaurant serving one course off a tablet, what does he show on his tablet? He shows a round white plate. And so why not give people a round white plate? Why show a plate on a tablet? Makes no sense. But I think it's a chef sort of playing, experimenting in the space. They don't know what will work and what will resonate with the diners of today or tomorrow. But something in that playfulness and experimentation will stick. There will be a kind of a reason to believe, a reason to do this thing that will then come to the mainstream. In our own hands, we think, if you realize, once you recognize how important the color of the cup, the plate, the bowl, the can is, then one asks, is there a perfect color to serve all my dishes? And the answer is no. It's partly about contrast between the food color and the plate color. And if that's true, that means maybe you've either got to buy a rainbow assortment of crockery, different colors for different colors of food. I don't want to do that. But then if I have my tablet screen, I can change the color at will. So I only need one tablet in order to have a rainbow of colors. So there's a kind of functional, potentially a functional benefit there. So I think it's exciting. And for me, in a way, one of the, I think, real possibilities is around this sort of total experience. And using technology, when I see some of the providers who are already delivering meals to so many of our homes and at the same time providing content. They know what movies we're watching, so they're downloading them, or which music tracks we're listening to. So if I'm in control of the food you're getting at home and your entertainment, why are these independent experiences? What would happen if you put them together? And if I say, okay, you've ordered an Indian, why don't I recommend The Last Days of the Raj or some Indian movie? If I know you've picked that movie or that soundtrack, why not match the food that way? And I think there's a lot of potential there to use technology to synchronize sensations. And 5 or 10 years from today, we might be thinking that sort of meal where you go pre-theatre, sit down to have your 3 courses, and then you go to the entertainment. What a backward notion that was. Why not mix our entertainments, mix our pleasures, and have the operatic waiters in the restaurant, or sort of a secret cinema, or food theatre, a whole new kind of merging of our pleasures, one that is challenging, but also exciting, one at which traditional chefs have not been taught in cookery schools, in the Paul Bocuse, in the Culinary Institute of America, but who a growing number of them are open to, I think, working with the creatives of other spheres in order to figure out how to combine our pleasures using technology in the restaurant, but thereafter in the home in new and innovative ways.
I have a lot of a lot of windows opening right now on the jobs of the future, because we are stating here what the new destinations would be, how we approach the destinations as well. So you traveling the world, what do you see in hospitality? According to your view, what are the jobs that are staying? What are the jobs that are going? And what are the new jobs now in hospitality business?
So I think I'm not sure robots will be taking over the world just yet. I think that dining and drinking is fundamentally a social activity. We do not eat for nutrition, really. Rarely we're hungry enough that we have to. We're eating for socialization, to be with others, to communicate. And hence, when somebody says the waiters of the future will not exist because you'll have at any restaurant you'll have a tablet and you'll just tap in your thing and it will go straight to the kitchen and the robot chef will prepare the food. As on the Quantum of the Seas, you have the robot cocktail maker.
By San Francisco Extra.
Yeah, nonsense. That's not going to happen at all. Because as soon as you mess with the social aspect of dining, something is lost. Which is what happens in the Sound of the Sea dish. For one course, putting the headphones in is fine because it stops people talking.
That brings back emotions.
Yeah, but if you had the headphones in for the whole meal, or those who've tried silent dining, 10 courses when you can't speak, it always fails because it ignores the social element that those tablets ignore. And therefore the chefs and the mixologists, some of whom are worried that their jobs will be gone when they see that Momentum Machines in California is promising to ship robot chefs to the home for $70,000 by next year or the year thereafter. But I think there's something fundamentally missing there, which is what Tim Hartford in the Financial Times calls kind of the cult of inconsistency. The robot chefs are sort of premised on the notion of perfectly consistent every time. That's what you get. And then Tim Hartford says, no, I'm not sure that's really what I want. When I go to a restaurant or to a bar or to an artisanal bread maker, I want to feel the hand of the maker. And I feel the hand of the maker through variation. Sometimes things are slightly better and sometimes a little bit worse. There's difference. And that's what I'm going for in part. If I wanted perfectly consistent every time, give me a processed meal off the production line. That's kind of robotic food. And the same thing for the Quantum of the Seas. It's kind of fun, a bit naff to have this robot mixing your cocktails like Tom Cruise. But what the robot cocktail maker does not have is a robotic nose or a robotic tongue. And hence that robot cocktail maker has to work to formula and has to use bottled lime juice. And any cocktail maker worth his salt or her salt says, bottled lime juice, never. I would always use the fresh ingredients. They taste different and better, and that's something that the robots cannot do yet, or I think for the foreseeable future.
So humankind is not over yet?
Not just.
Not just. Okay, we only have 4 minutes. My last question for you is,
and you might think, I suppose, of if you go back to the 1890s, people were then already thinking about the future of food and worried about it. Already then in the 1890s, there was kind of a division between slow food and fast food that we see replayed now. And if you look at the feminist novelists like Anna Dodd, the food futurologists and the scientists, the chemists, they were all predicting a future where we would not be dining at all. That's very inefficient to waste hours eating meals. And you have the scientist writing about the future of the United States of America in 1985. At that time, the businessman will have a soup pill, followed by a meat pill, and then a dessert pill, all the time working at their desk, being maximally efficient. That has not come to pass. It will not come to pass, because again, as well as the social element of food, it's very much that sort of sensory and sensual element, and where Anna Dodd was saying, there'll be no kitchens in the future. There'll just be like culinary conduits that would deliver the meal into your home at the appropriate moment. And I sort of wonder today whether the rise of the Uber Eats and the Deliveroos and the home food delivery is kind of a version of that.
But that's on the delivery side. My last question to you is, you've been in Italy for 2 days? 3 days? Almost. Okay, your best meal experience in Italy?
So it'd have to be the one last night in Milan with a young, sort of Nordic-trained Italian chef. 28 chairs, it was called. And that was sort of a great experience, both to see the innovation around plateware, plating, giving a taste of place, having a dish that reminded him of his growing up by Bari and the sea, the taste of the sea with, licking things off stones, being served things off little tiles, So playing with plateware,
Still experimental.
experimental, but also with a keen sense of place and of sustainability, as many of the young chefs have, trying to entertain, but challenging what is a plate, what is cutlery, what is a meal experience, what is a dish, and how can we nudge people in a tasty and memorable manner to eat better, more sustainably for themselves and or for the planet.
Okay, last thing. I have a copy of your book. It's in English.
It's coming in Italian.
All
slowly,
right, okay.
slowly.
It's coming in Italian and...
Probably within the year. Just signed up last week. Though it's been a battle. The book, initially the rights were being sold 2 years ago, and no Italian publisher wanted it. And when asked why, it was because science and food, that might go on in the UK or Spain or North America, but Italy is just not ready for that. Those things do not mix.
We started all this with Marinetti.
Yep.
We're not prepared yet.
And you'd think with that whole futurist chapter, the last chapter of the book, drawing attention to what amazing things were going on here 80 years ago, there would be an interest. But it's not here yet, but it is coming, I think.
The last thing before we go, I have this and this. Thank you very much. Charles Spence. If you have questions, we have 50 seconds. Do you have questions? No, I don't see any hands up. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Diamo un altro applauso al professor Charles Spence. Grazie mille.